Hello, everybody, and welcome into another episode of the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. My name is Ryan Wormley. I do social media here at Fantasy Pros, in addition to sometimes hosting podcasts. And joining me for today's episode are a couple of standout guests, as per usual. First up, a man who will be podcasting with me a whopping 3 times this week. It's Dan Harris. Dan, how excited are you to spend so much time with me over the next couple of days?
As many people listening know, I was a lawyer before I joined this full-time. I'm still a lawyer, and clearly I should not have worked in anything involving contracts because I neglected to put this part into my contract that I can't be doing this many podcasts with you per week. This is terrible, and you can see it's affecting my performance right now. I mean, listen to my voice. If I was podcasting with Joe, I'd be at 100%. But with you, I'm just tanking it completely. So I'll get through it. I like our guest mildly, so I will be able to sort of power through. But this has to be the end of our time together very soon, right?
In addition to being a lawyer, you are also, of course, the editor-in-chief here, so there's really no excuse. You have full control over the situation. Also joining us today, as you mentioned, is someone you guys may not know, but he knows a whole lot about fantasy football. He's one half of Drinking and Talking Fantasy Football, part of Ball Blast Football, and a regular on Harris Football. It's Jake Trowbridge. Jake, you describe yourself on Twitter as a fantasy football good time haver. Would you say that description still applied during Week 9?
No, not even a little bit. I should have deleted that before coming on this, honestly, because it ruined me. It made me a bad time haver. By the way, I was about to say that I was jealous of both of you for getting to podcast with both of you so frequently, but it doesn't seem like that's reciprocated amongst you. So,
yeah, it's a little too nice starting off the bat here, Jake. I expect you to step up your game of snark and just general meanness going on as the longer you podcast with Dan. As always, I want to make sure that the listeners can find the three of us online. Dan's Twitter handle is at DanHarris80. Jacob's is at Jake Trowbridge. That's Jake as Jake, and then Trowbridge. And I can be found at Ryan Wormley. Wormley is like how you dress when it's cold outside. And of course, you can find Fantasy Pros all over the internet at Fantasy Pros. You can also find us at fantasypros.com/myplaybook, and there you can sign up for our entire suite of tools to help you dominate the 2021 fantasy season. That includes our trade analyzer, which allows you to get instant analysis for any trade offer. We also have a trade finder that can do the heavy lifting in your negotiations. For example, I used it to swing a deal for a replacement for Derrick Henry just last week in a 14-team league. That was not easy, and frankly, I'm still despondent about losing him, but the trade analyzer made it that much easier. You can also find us on the Fantasy Pros Discord server, which can be found at fantasypros.com/chat. Anybody can sign up for some good old-fashioned fantasy football chatter, but remember, premium subscribers gain access to dozens of extra channels, including AMAs with analysts like Joey P, Yates when he's not on baby duty, and of course, Dan. You can also get advice from fellow fantasy fanatics, and we even have extra channels for other topics like movies, music, and my personal favorite, television. Fellas, let's jump into Monday Night Football. It was a surprisingly fun game, especially at the end, as we had a little back and forth, especially there in the fourth quarter. It looked like it was going to be a slow, defense-driven game at first. It did hit the over. David Montgomery making his return, 13 rushes, 63 yards. I'll start there with you, Jake. Where are you ranking David Montgomery rest of the season?
He's right back into where he should have been all along, which is that fringe running back one tier there. I know some folks have difficulty trusting him. And Khalil Herbert certainly made that a lot more interesting during Montgomery's absence, but I'm very comfortable with him flirting with that running back one territory.
Justin Fields had another strong game coming off of his big breakout against the Niners. Dan, 291 yards, just the one touchdown, one interception. Are you seeing enough from him in the last 2 weeks that you would consider him a viable fantasy starter rest of the season, or is the position just so stacked that there's still not really any room for him?
I mean, we're not close in a single quarterback league for me. It is encouraging, certainly, to see his production and him growing, especially with Matt Nagy back. So it wasn't like, oh, look, Nagy comes back and everything goes terribly wrong. He has been more impressive, and they're accentuating his skills by getting him, designed rollouts. They're using his legs a lot more. So I am intrigued. Certainly he's moved into the starting quarterback in a 2-quarterback league or a super flex format, but the quarterback position, especially top 12, is way too deep for him to even be sort of a fringe guy, probably even in the right matchup. So still just a 2-quarterback league guy for me.
Jake, Cole Kmet, 6 catches, 87 yards. He was one of the best tight ends to come out in his draft class. Hasn't really done much since he's gotten to the NFL. Tight ends, of course, often take a while to develop and sort of start to make their impact in the NFL. Kyle Pitts, notwithstanding. Do you think that there's a connection here between Kmet and Fields? I know at various points this season we've seen Fields really dial in on Darnell Mooney. We now saw him yesterday sort of dial in on Kmet. Do you think Kmet can break into starting tight end status at some point this season?
Any tight end can at this point, because aside from the top 3 guys, it's just absolutely garbage all the way around. So I don't mind Kmet. What concerned me, though, was how frequently Fields still looked Jimmy Graham's way last night. That shouldn't have happened. He had back-to-back-to-back end zone targets, and that's terrifying. But, I think Kmet, you can start in the right matchups for sure.
Not to spend too much time on the Bears, because who really cares about the Bears, but Allen Robinson, 4 catches for 68 yards. He's somebody that we've talked about, it seems like every single week on all of our shows, as just one of the biggest frustrations for fantasy managers of the entire 2021 season. So Dan, I almost don't even know how to ask the question, but what do managers do, and what do they take away from a fine Allen Robinson performance, better than what we've gotten for a lot of the year, but still not nearly what we were hoping for preseason?
Well, first of all, he left at the very end. I don't know if he left, but he looked like he was down a little bit. I think it was his hamstring. Haven't heard anything about that as we record, so obviously you need to monitor that. And they have a bye next week, which makes it all the more insane that David Montgomery not only came back in this game, but got a ton of work and also looked great. So very bizarre for me. But with Robinson, I don't know. Robinson's probably available at this point on your waiver wire. I am not rushing out there to pick up Allen Robinson based on a okay performance here against the Steelers. I will say that if you are an Allen Robinson fan and you desperately want to hold on to his value, you have more reason to do so now. But for me, he's still just sort of a guy who you want to stash on your bench. Fine. I have no confidence that I'm going to be able to play him weekly going forward.
And let's get at least one Steeler in here. Kind of an easy team to look at from a fantasy perspective. I mean, you're obviously starting Najee Harris. You're probably starting Deontay Johnson. You're probably not starting many other people. But Pat Freiermuth did have 2 more touchdowns this week among his 5 catches, just 43 yards. But clearly appears to be one of the Steelers' favorite options in the red zone. Jake, I'll just ask you, is he somebody, I assume you have him higher than Kmet, but is he somebody that could sort of become an every week must-start tight end in the second half of the season?
Yeah, for sure. I think Juju's absence has really opened up something that Ben Roethlisberger needed to see. And now that he's made this connection with Freiermuth, I think going the rest of the way, there's not a game where, unless you have an absolute stud, I'm sitting Freiermuth.
Guys, we've got over 1 million teams synced to our My Playbook tool, so don't forget to sync your leagues for free and get access to great tools like our cheat sheets, league power rankings, start-sit assistance, waiver assistance, and more. And in My Playbook right now, the trades are as interesting as ever. Our most traded player this week is unsurprisingly James Conner, but we're going to save our discussion on him for a little bit later in the show. Instead, first up, we'll talk about the second most traded running back, and I think it's somebody that we all hoped would get traded in real life, and that's Melvin Gordon. It was another productive day for him in the Broncos' rout of the Cowboys on Sunday. He went for 80 yards and a touchdown. More importantly, he had 21 rushing attempts, by far his most of the season. Obviously, the game script was in his favor, but now that he's staying in Denver the rest of the season, do you think he's somebody managers should be trading for? Dan, I'll start with you. Are you buying, selling, or holding, and where is he in your rest of season rankings?
I'm probably essentially holding. I think Melvin Gordon does not get the respect he deserves because Javonte Williams is a really good running back, and everybody just wants to see Javonte Williams be the guy, which he's never going to be. Melvin Gordon remains right where he basically always is, which is 23rd in my rest of season running back rankings. The thing is with Gordon is the Broncos want to lean on the run. You know that. You know he's good for double-digit touches every single game. And the bottom line is that Melvin Gordon is a higher-graded running back in PFF than Javonte Williams. So the idea that he needs to be pushed aside, I think, is a little silly. Now, again, the schedule going forward, you've got the Eagles. They give up a ton of points to running backs. Then a bye. Then the Chargers, the Chiefs, and the Lions. This is a really good schedule here going forward for Melvin Gordon. They do have some offensive line injuries going forward. I think Glasgow's out for the rest of the season. Bowles has been dealing with an ankle, I think. So they've got some injuries there, but for the most part, this is still going to continue to be a split backfield, but there's room for both those guys. And with the schedule, I'm at worst holding, and if I can buy at not like astronomical prices, at basically low-end RB2 prices, I would be buying.
Jake, what about you? Are you buying, selling, or holding? And how much are you concerned about the Broncos? I mean, they did trade away Von Miller. Obviously, it was a very surprising upset win over the Cowboys, but are you worried about if they're not in as favorable game scripts going forward that we might start to see a little bit less of Gordon?
Well, first of all, I so badly wanted to disagree just so that we could get the feathers ruffled here early on in the show, but I can't. No, you're at the risk of patting you on the back at all. You made some very smart points there, and I do think that Melvin Gordon, going forward, even with, as you said, the defense maybe taking a step back overall since Von is gone, I think, he still can be involved in the passing game enough where it's not going to shake me to think that he's going to get written out of a game script anytime soon.
Throughout the show, we'll be offering trade comparisons that are pulled directly from our My Playbook data. These comparisons are some of the most popular accepted trades for these guys since Sunday's games. And again, I always have to emphasize that these trades actually did happen in actual real-life leagues. So even if they might seem lopsided in one direction or another, these are the types of trades that, especially in your home and casual leagues, you can try and go swing a deal for. Dan, I'll start with you. Would you trade Melvin Gordon for Michael Pittman Jr.? I'd imagine that's an easy one.
Yeah, I will take that trade especially. But I will say this. If you are in a very good spot at wide receiver, and all trades at this point need to be evaluated with that context because we're into week 10, you know your team. If you did that and you needed a running back, I would be okay with it. But in a vacuum, yes, Michael Pittman Jr. is worth more than Melvin Gordon.
Jake, how about Melvin Gordon and Hunter Henry for Myles Gaskin and Michael Carter?
No. Myles Gaskin and me, we're just not going to get along for the rest of the season, no matter what he does at this point. So I would prefer to keep Gordon. And Hunter Henry, is what I wanted Jonnu Smith to be in the Patriots offense. And that's basically just somebody who can occasionally get a touchdown, and you need that. So I'll keep Gordon.
I think Henry's about half of what Yates wanted Jonnu Smith to be before the season. Lastly,
his sixth-ranked tight end, I'm not kidding, going into the year. Nobody ever let Kyle Yates forget that he ranked Jonnu Smith sixth coming into the year.
I will bring it up on every show I ever host
Correct.
with him, and every show I don't host with him. I will continue to bring it up.
Lastly, I'm going to send him a tweet right now, actually,
yes,
while we're...
Please do. I'm going to give this question to both of you, but I'll start with you, Jake. Melvin Gordon, Tyler Lockett, and Kyle Pitts for Travis Kelce, Kadarius Toney, and Khalil Herbert. I'll repeat that. Melvin Gordon, Tyler Lockett, and Kyle Pitts for Travis Kelce, Kadarius Toney, and Khalil Herbert. Which side are you taking?
I'm 1,000% on the Melvin Gordon side still with this one. I love me some Kyle Pitts. I can't get enough of the Kyle Pitts. Every other piece in that maybe evens out. But I love Pitts so much that I'm willing to overpay even at this point in the season because his trajectory is just so high.
Dan?
I'm going to. I know Jake said he wanted some conflict, so I'll start it here. I'm only 999% in favor of the Melvin Gordon side on that one. Yes, I agree completely. I mean, look, Khalil Herbert is essentially useless now at this point, right? I mean, Dave Montgomery came back in his first game, should have been limited. Ridiculous that he's out there. Looked great, and Khalil Herbert was a complete afterthought, so he's entirely irrelevant. You're getting three useful pieces there. Travis Kelce's stock is a little bit down. Very easy Melvin Gordon side for me.
I will just say in Herbert's defense, he's useless right now while Montgomery's healthy, but obviously at this point in the season, it's a little more reasonable to handcuff guys, and we've seen Herbert make an impact when Montgomery is out, so I wouldn't say useless as a bench player, but you're right, he's not giving you anything clearly right now. Next up is another running back with a favorable game script on Sunday, the Titans' Adrian Peterson. AP led the team in rushing attempts and also scored a touchdown, which sounds nice. But of course, him leading the team in rushes only meant 10 rushes for 21 yards with a long of just 6. How much are you guys taking away from his first game as Derrick Henry's replacement? Jake, are you buying, selling, or holding?
I don't think there's any world where you can really sell him right now. I also, you can hold him just because running backs, it's terrifying out there in that landscape. And so if you have a healthy body and he only has to stay healthy for another few games, so that's a blessing for a 36-year-old running back, then I think you have to hold him. But I'm much more on the McNichols side there in that backfield. I'd rather have the guy who's going to be catching passes. So I guess, hold Adrian if you're desperate.
Dan, where's Adrian Peterson in your rest of season rankings?
Man, he's somebody who I kind of, when I was doing my rest of season ranking, was like, I don't really know what to do with you, sir. So I'm just going to kind of leave you right here in the low end flex situation. Right now he's 32. Again, I write the trade chart for FantasyPros. I do that on Tuesday late afternoon. So after I'm done with this and our live streams, I'm going to really finalize and tweak my final rankings, but he'll end up as a low end flex. I actually think that the bigger threat to Peterson is DeVonta Foreman, who looked really good in that game, looked much better than Peterson did. But I will say the one thing is that, look, when you're 36, and I'm familiar with how it is as an old person who sort of gets off the couch for the first time in a year and then has to go into a football game, I thought Peterson did fine. And the fact that they gave him a goal line carry and he converted it bodes well for his rest of season usage. So I think the bigger thing for me is that it wasn't so much how Peterson looked. It was the fact that Foreman also came off his couch, but he's 8 years younger, so it's easier for him, and looked pretty good with it. So I think he's really just going to kind of be in a timeshare here with McNichols and with Foreman, and so that's going to sort of put a cap on his value. But I do think there's a good chance he starts getting the goal line work and has a good chance to fall into the end zone, and that's going to be somebody you can start as a flex. So if I roster him, I agree with Jake. I don't think you can sell him high after this game or anything like that, or sell him really for anything. So I'd probably just hold, and if I have to start him like I would this week, I would.
Well, let me just tell you, you guys are both wrong. Somebody actually traded Adrian Peterson for, I kid you not, Jonathan Taylor in one of our leagues in my playbook. I obviously won't ask you guys which side you preferred that one, but you said he can't be sold high right now. Apparently, in at least one league, he could. Jake, this one is still fairly lopsided, but I'll still ask you, Adrian Peterson for Mike Evans.
Oh, it's Mike Evans for me, 100%. Even though the desperation at running back can be high, there's no way I'm making that trade.
This second trade comparison is kind of silly, Dan, but I still want to ask it. Would you trade Adrian Peterson for Justin Tucker? You get an elite kicker on an elite offense who's already had his bye week, so you can lock and load him the rest of the season. Even if you do have a need at running back, would you be willing to make that swap?
No. I would not do that unless they threw in Jonathan Taylor, in which case I would consider it for the Adrian Peterson trade. No, don't ever trade for a kicker. Stop it. Pick up a kicker every single week and stream it if you need to.
I wouldn't have asked about any kicker other than Justin Tucker.
Hey, man, it is fine. I'm telling you, my son is in a league, and he had Justin Tucker, and he refused to drop him during his bye week. So that's it. You've got some people. They value the kickers, including 8-year-old animals that I have at home. So
my mom, who I love dearly and who I got into fantasy football about 8 years ago, had been playing for a good 4 or 5 years, so she sort of knew what she was talking about at this point when this story happened. She once, during a draft, was sitting there just nervous as all anything, and she's like, oh no, I really hope the guy once gonna fall. Oh no, I don't think he's gonna get to me. And he finally falls to her in the 5th round, Justin Tucker, and she didn't know it was gonna happen. And happily enough for her, it did happen. She did have Tucker that season. She, of course, did not win that league that year or any other year. But
is she the person who traded Jonathan Taylor for Adrian Peterson as well? Because I want to talk to that person. Tell your mom we need to play in a league together.
Our most traded receiver this week is Brandin Cooks. And he's a really interesting case right now. On the one hand, he thrived as a fantasy asset early in the season when Tyrod Taylor was his quarterback, and Taylor obviously returned from injury just this week. Cooks saw a whopping 13 targets in the game, which was obviously great to see. But on the other hand, Taylor was pretty brutal in what should have been a cushy matchup against the Dolphins defense, and Cooks ended up with just 6 catches for 56 yards. So despite the disaster that is the Houston offense, Cooks is a top 20 PPR receiver so far this season. Jake, are you buying, selling, or holding on him the rest of the way?
I came into the season very, very high on Brandin Cooks, just because he's been able to produce regardless of whatever garbage situation is at quarterback. And he right now, though, is more of a floor play than anything. He's going to continue to get a crazy amount of targets because there's nobody else in that offense to really steal him away. Sorry, Jordan Akins. Love you, but you're not a top-tier option there. So I think you can trade for him if you need that person in your lineup every week for the safe floor. That 10 to 15 points. I know he's not going to goose me. That's Brandin Cooks' role. So he's my ideal flex trade in that situation.
Dan, like I said, he's been a top 20 receiver so far to this point this season. Are you ranking him that highly rest of season?
I think I may have him just outside that. Give me 1 second to pull up my rest of season rankings, but I do have him 23rd. So he's right outside there, but I would buy for sure. I think anybody on the Texans right now is probably just going to be hated by fantasy managers, because I think we maybe overestimate sometimes how people look at fantasy players, and they don't dig into the fact that he's got the 5th most targets in the NFL, or 29.6% of his team's targets, or 498 air yards. People don't care about that. People see Brandin Cooks, Texans. Did you see Tyrod Taylor? That was gross. I hate this team. I want off. And a lot of people just do that. So look, Davis Mills is not good. Tyrod Taylor was terrible, but I do think he'll probably be better. I think this was a little bit of rust. But you look at their schedule coming up, the Titans, the Jets, the Colts, the Seahawks, and the Jaguars. That is a very beatable schedule for a wide receiver. So if he's going to continue to see all those targets, yeah, Jake's right. The ceiling's probably not there because the Texans aren't going to score that much. But there's a lot of fantasy production from there. And as somebody who rosters like DJ Moore in like 40 leagues and is just seeing the nonstop like 10 half PPR points, I'll take a floor with Brandin Cooks at this point. So he's a guy who I am targeting in trades.
One challenge trade that we have here, 1-for-1 receiver for receiver, is Brandin Cooks for Courtland Sutton. Which side would you prefer for that, Jake?
I am getting weary of Courtland Sutton and his role with Jerry Jeudy's return. So give me that safety of Brandin Cooks.
Dan, we're going to mention Jonathan Taylor here again. Would you trade Brandin Cooks and Aaron Jones for Jonathan Taylor?
Yikes. That's actually pretty close. I think there's reason to be concerned about Aaron Jones here going forward, although I do think he's a buy low candidate personally. I guess it would depend on who Brandin Cooks replaces in your lineup. If you have a total dud in that spot and where every wide receiver is completely gone, I might do that, but Jonathan Taylor is on such a different level right now that I would be hard pressed. So that's a little team specific. I don't find it to be an imbalanced trade though.
We'll keep this last guy quick, but I did want to make sure we mention him because I was really surprised to see him on the most traded list, and that's Michael Pittman Jr. We've talked a lot on the show about how his star is really rising this season, especially in the last month. It feels like every single week he's somebody's biggest wide receiver riser rest of season, or he's a great, honestly not a buy low, a buy high candidate. He led the team in receiving once again in Week 9, 64 yards and a touchdown, 5 touchdowns in his last 5 games. He's a top 10 receiver in every type of scoring format right now. So, Dan, are you buying, selling, or holding on Pittman? And more importantly, I think, where is he in your rest of season rankings by now?
Yeah, I'm probably just holding based on where my guess is other people have him. I have him at 18th. Overall at wide receiver. So still a strong wide receiver too. I mean, look, he does have a lot of positive things, working in his favor. I would like to see what it looks like when T.Y. Hilton is on the field for a lengthy stretch of time. Maybe that won't be this year, so who knows if he is. But the targets still just aren't that consistent, right? He had that big, 15-target game against Tennessee, but the other 3 of his last 4 games, 3, 4, and 6 targets. That's something that makes me a little wary, even if he gets the red zone targets. So, again, a very, very solid wide receiver, too. I would buy him. My guess is just that, again, Michael Pittman Jr., a young kid, plays great, goes up and gets the ball, feels like he could explode in every single game. That's a guy that I guess the general consensus probably just wants a little bit more than I do. So I'd probably hold. I probably wouldn't be able to pay the prices necessary to acquire him.
Jake, would you trade Michael Pittman Jr. for Saquon Barkley?
Ooh. Oh, that gets me in my funny area because Saquon Barkley is so amazing, obviously, when he is on the field. The question becomes, what do we get to see when he comes back onto the field? When is he coming back onto the field? How long is he going to stay on the field? And with all these questions, I'm still going Saquon because of the running back situation overall. You can find a replacement level value for Michael Pittman at wide receiver. You just can't do that with Saquon when he's there and healthy.
Dan, how about Damien Harris and Pittman for Alvin Kamara?
Damien Harris and Pittman for Alvin Kamara. I do think I would do that, yes. And I think this comes back to what Jake was basically saying is like when you have the opportunity to get that stud running back, and I think Kamara fell a little bit this week in my rest of season rankings just based on how much Mark Ingram is factoring in. He is still an elite fantasy running back. I have major concerns about what we're going to see from Damien Harris going forward. He's obviously battling now the head injury, so who knows about that. So I would do that. Again, all of this is you have somebody who can fill in at wide receiver, generally speaking, for you. But in a vacuum, yes, I would do that for Kamara.
Let's move on to everybody's favorite segment, buy low and sell high. Remember, when offering and accepting your own trades, be sure to check out FantasyPros' suite of tools like the Trade Analyzer and Trade Finder to help you facilitate these trades and help you win your league. Jake, let's start with your number one buy low running back right now.
Right now, I'm sending out offers for Kareem Hunt, running back for the Cleveland Browns. He's been injured. He's been absent from lineups. And anytime that happens in your league, there gets some frustration. There gets some concern with those fantasy managers, especially if they are desperate to add points into their active lineups. So I'm trading for the guy who is currently RB10 in points per game in PPR formats. He's eligible to come off IR at any point. So he could be playing the Patriots in Week 10 hypothetically. I don't know if he gets called up this week. But regardless, his fantasy playoffs stretch is incredible. He gets to play Baltimore in Week 14. Then he gets to play the Raiders. He gets to play the Packers. None of those matchups scare me at all for a running back, especially a pass-catching running back. And I think with Odell Beckham gone, he's going to be called upon just a little bit more. He'll see a negligible uptick there in targets just to keep things interesting. But he is a safe running back once he comes back.
With Nick Chubb looking like the best pure runner in football who's healthy right now and Hunt injured the last few weeks, his value really will never be lower. So just to be clear, you're buying in on him even if he still is the second fiddle to Chubb in the offense. It's not in the hopes that if Chubb goes out, he's a league winner. You think he brings a ton of value even as the number 2 guy.
Yeah, he has standalone value with Chubb there. Of course, they are a dynamite 1-2 punch, but you get that added incentive. Not incentive maybe, but you get that added bonus if Chubb were to go down. Now you have de facto running back 1.
One trade we have here is Brandin Cooks for Kareem Hunt. It sounds like you'd much prefer Hunt.
Yeah, again, just because the replaceability at wide receiver.
And then a bigger one here, Kareem Hunt, James Robinson, and Chris Godwin for A.J. Brown and David Montgomery.
Ooh, I love A.J. Brown and his rest of season outlook here. And we just talked about David Montgomery and how quality he looked in that first start back. So I think I'd actually lean Montgomery side here.
Nice. Dan, who's your buy low running back?
Excuse me. It is Aaron Jones. And it's a little weird. I'm dying. It's fine. I feel like, generally speaking, okay, you're like, well, buy low, Aaron Jones, blah, blah, blah. But I was in our Discord, fantasypros.com/chat, and we do it stages. It's like a live radio show. You pull people on stage, they can ask questions. People are very worried right now about Aaron Jones. They're not giving him away, but I do think that there is a buy low opportunity here with him. And I see a lot of people saying, I got to get rid of him, and get a big return. But still, I actually would be buying Aaron Jones right now. The reason people want to get rid of him is not so much his performance, right? I mean, he had the big dud against Washington, but so did A.J. Dillon. Went crazy against Arizona when you had no Davante Adams, and then kind of mediocre 12 for 53 against the Chiefs. But it's really A.J. Dillon, again, factoring in a lot more. 16 carries, 78 yards against Arizona, 12 carries, 90 yards against the Chiefs, so more productive. I am concerned a little bit about Dillon, but I think, again, you can basically throw out the last 2 weeks because of the fact that you had no Davante Adams or any receivers 2 weeks ago, and then you had Jordan Love. And so I agree that Dillon looked better and he got more touches, but here is the thing. You look at their PFF grades where it's about to matter going forward, and that's as a receiver because Aaron Rodgers is about to come back. Jones's PFF grade is 76.3 as a receiver. A.J. Dillon is 55.1. As a pass blocker, Jones is 73.7. Dillon is 56.8. That matters for two reasons. The first is we cannot ignore that Aaron Rodgers is about to come back and probably going to want to make a statement going forward. He's going to want to put up some big numbers here, so I think it's going to be more important to protect him as a pass blocker and to factor in as a receiver for the running backs. And second, who are their opponents? Seattle, with Russell Wilson back. Minnesota, where Kirk Cousins is able to put up points, and the Rams. You know they're going to put up points as well. So there's going to be a lot more throwing, a lot more passing, a lot more Aaron Jones, in my opinion. So, again, I thought he was a sell high a few weeks ago, and this was sort of part of it. But now, at this point, it strikes me as he is a buy low and presents an opportunity because I still think that he's in that, not the very, very top tier of RB1s, but certainly a very strong RB1 for me going forward.
And when talking about Jones and anybody involved with the Packers offense, we're not concerned right now, at all, about a potential further fallout with Aaron Rodgers. Do we think it was just this week and it's sort of the end of it, at least for this season?
So I'm not an expert on the protocols or the discipline that can go. I know if there are, I did look up at the, whatever it was, and apparently if there are repeated violations of the protocols, then there could potentially be suspensions. But my guess is, again, he's eligible to return, I think, on Saturday, and it's a home game. So my guess is he'll be back for Sunday against the Seahawks. And so for right now, I am operating, when I'm looking at trades, as if Aaron Rodgers is going to play the remainder of the season, and I'm willing to buy the other Green Bay Packers pieces at those prices.
Trade comparison here, Aaron Jones and DJ Moore for Justin Jefferson and Javonte Williams.
Yeah, I will take the Aaron Jones side. That's not that far off. I'm very concerned about DJ Moore, extremely concerned. And it doesn't really matter if it's Sam Darnold or PJ Walker throwing him the ball. But I do think that the gap between Jones and Javonte Williams is bigger than the gap between Jefferson and DJ Moore. So I'll take the Jones side.
Jake, let's move to your sell high running back.
Well, I want to put a caveat before I even talk about my sell high running back, because in a lot of leagues you can't afford to sell your running backs because of how terrible things are and the injuries and whatnot. So I just want to put that out there. So don't come at me, bro. But my sell high is James Conner, running back for the Arizona Cardinals. Now, at first blush, Chase Edmonds just went out here this week. And so he's going to be out probably for a couple of weeks, it seems like. Benjamin could step into his place pretty easily. There are folks that believe that. Or there are folks that believe James Conner gets the full workload. Both of those things scare me just a little bit, because James Conner is currently RB20 in points per game in full PPR, but 50% of those points have come from touchdowns. That's an absurd number. He's tied with Derrick Henry at 10 rushing touchdowns. The difference is Henry's rushing touchdowns, those 10 came on 219 rush attempts. Conner's came on 115. So how sustainable is that touchdown efficiency? I don't know. Maybe it's a prime Tyler Lockett situation and he's going to make me look like a fool and he'll rack up another 10 on the back half here, but I'm not banking on that. And I'm also a little nervous if he does get the full workload or an approximation of that, can he continue to stand up to that? Because we've seen in the past, and I'm not an injury expert, but I've seen in the past with him getting that full workload and then he can't stay healthy. And so that's a kind of dual concern for me.
Dan, this must have been the clear choice this week because you also picked Conner for your sell high. Do you have the same concerns as Jake, or is there anything else that worries you about Conner going forward the rest of the season?
So I do have the same concerns that Jake has, and I will say that by sell high at this point, Jake, I'm sure Ryan will ask us a couple of trade questions here, but let's put a point on it. I moved James Conner up to a mid-tier RB2 for me going forward. That to me is sort of, I think you can sell him for higher than that. So I like Conner a lot more obviously now with the Chase Edmonds injury. But I do think that, first of all, if you don't sell a guy after he has 173 yards and 3 touchdowns, you are not playing fantasy football correctly. That's just what you do. But I agree that I have concerns, generally speaking, about the fact that James Conner has shown in the past he doesn't stand up to a full workload. The Cardinals are going to make the playoffs. They know that. They want to protect Connor. He's got a ridiculous, not that it necessarily is even going to end, but he has 8 carries from inside the 5-yard line, and he has 7 touchdowns. That's just a ridiculous number right now. They will continue to give him the work. But I worry about that as well. And I do wonder, Jake, I mean, I have him, I think, 17th the rest of the season for a running back. Does that sound like roughly around where you think he's at for you if you weren't going to sell him, if you just valued him going forward?
I think it's very reasonable because there's been such a top chunk of those running backs that have gotten out of the mix. They've fallen down to injury. So by default, it's tough to put him outside of the top 20, I think. There's no way. But yeah, I think it's very reasonable. But if you're looking at the guy who just finished as RB1 this last week, that expectation is going to be maybe top 10 for people.
Well, the other thing that's nice with Connor is, you know, for as long as Edmonds isn't playing, you're going to feel comfortable starting him. I know a lot of managers who had Connor on their team haven't gotten some of the early season production out of him, especially back in September and early October, because, you know, when you have both him and Edmonds as well, do I even want to start him? Is this going to be a week where he gets the opportunities, in the end zone, red zone? So, you know, he's a guy that for at least the next month, it's set it and forget it if he's on your team. It's very easy to make those decisions, and that could be appealing to some managers. First trade comparison on him, I'll give this to Jake. Would you sell James Conner for Julio Jones?
No, not a chance. Again, it's just replaceability. Julio's been, I don't know, he's been icky, if I can use that word, and I use it very rarely, but I think it applies here, so I'd take Conner.
Jake, I'll give you this one too. James Conner and CeeDee Lamb for Cordero Patterson and Michael Pittman Jr.
Oh, you wrinkled my brain because I love Cordero Patterson, and he has been set it and forget it this entire season so far, and I expect that to remain regardless of his situation. So give me the Cordero Patterson side.
Dan, James Conner, Dallas Goedert, and Rashod Bateman for Mike Davis, DJ Moore, and Kyle Pitts.
Too many names hurt my brain. Mike Davis is completely irrelevant. Don't even list him. Give me the names one more time. Without Mike Davis.
James Conner, Dallas Goedert, and Rashod Bateman for redacted DJ Moore and Kyle Pitts.
Oh, goodness. I mean, I get... Probably not, I guess. Only if you have the running back depth to lose James Conner, because James Conner is still going to be a reliable running back at this point, and you are not getting back a reliable running back with redacted. So it's not going to make a difference there. If you can afford to do that, fine, but I probably wouldn't. By the way, the other thing I'll say about Conner is you look at the schedule. Carolina, tough on running backs, then Seattle. Then they have a bye. Don't forget the byes. That really does factor in right now because Edmonds, even if he goes on IR, he could be back right after that. Then the Bears, then the Rams. Like, this is not an ideal schedule for just sort of your classic running back here in Arizona. So it's somebody who I do have concerns with. Still, with that, it's very difficult to give up now a guy like Conner unless you are really, really deep at running back.
Dan, let's stick with you as we move into the receivers. Who is your top buy low wideout?
Man, we could not have planned this any better because Jake totally set me up by calling Julio Jones icky, and he is my top buy low wide receiver. I would not, to be clear, trade James Conner to get Julio Jones. I do want to make that clear. But I would buy low on Julio Jones because, as Jake intimated correctly, nobody wants Julio Jones right now. So when you are buying low, I mean, you are buying at like borderline flex prices because just nobody wants him. He's battled injury all year. He's one game with more than 59 yards receiving. It has been bad, but he's the 22nd highest graded wide receiver from Pro Football Focus. 22nd. That is higher than Jamar Chase, DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Amari Cooper, Terry McLaurin. He is not washed or whatever the kids say. And look, with AJ Brown here, who I love and I'm optimistic on, the one thing that you know is that AJ Brown is going to draw the number one cornerback for the opposing team. We saw it this past week when he had Jalen Ramsey. That means Marshawn Lattimore is coming his way in a couple of weeks. He's going to get J.C. Jackson. That's going to leave room open for Julio Jones as he continues to get healthier. So really, for me, the reason he's a buy low, I don't rank him as a wide receiver 2 or anything like that. He's a wide receiver 3 for me, but I think nobody wants Julio Jones right now, and especially with the Titans probably going to throw a little bit more here going forward, just given where they are at running back. This is a prime time for me to add Julio Jones.
First of all, Dan, I'm the host on today's show, so please let me use words like intimated. Don't try and steal my thunder.
No.
with your
my
lawyer
whole
vocabulary.
thing is to use words that I don't actually understand. So that's how I pretend to be smarter than
That's
I am.
just today's on your word of the day calendar.
Toilet paper, yes, exactly.
Dan, would you trade Leonard Fournette for Julio Jones?
That I can't do. Just because, again, Jake has said it or intimated it many times, that the running back situation in just fantasy football right now is horrible. And if you can have that reliable RB2, borderline RB1 when you have Fournette, that's a guy I can't give up for a wide receiver 3. So too much for me.
How about a wide receiver for wide receiver, Mike Evans for Julio Jones?
Also too high. Like, this is where, man, this is terrible. I feel like, are these trades, by the way, that are being made, or are you making them up, Rye?
Oh, I have not, in every show I've ever hosted, I've never made up a trade. These are all real trades that have actually happened. The only exception is in the last segment where that trade actually did include Mike Davis. You just told me not to include him.
That's right. Redacted, as we talked about. Yeah, I can't do that either. Look, this is buy low for Julio Jones. If people, perhaps I'm wrong, if people are still valuing Julio Jones, not Icky, like Jake says, but instead as Leonard Fournette and Mike Evans, then I guess he's a sell high, everybody. Go out there and sell Julio Jones high. But for me, I do not think that those few trades represent the perception of his market value.
Jake, which receiver are you buying right now?
I'm going after, and this is probably more relevant to deeper leagues, deeper benches, because this guy may be available on waivers, but if he's not, you should be sending out the lowest of the low trade offers for Rashod Bateman, receiver for the Baltimore Ravens. I love this guy. I love him so much. He is the third option in an improved Ravens passing attack, and that passing attack goes only through 3 guys. It is Mark Andrews, it is Marquise Brown, and it is Rashod Bateman, and it is nobody else. Bateman's another case where he's been injured. He's only played 3 games to this point, so that's sticking in everybody's craw, if I can use an old-timey phrase such as that. His target share in those 3 healthy starts that he's had this year, though, have been really nice. He's gotten 20 targets. It's 20% of the target share overall for that team. I'm tired of missing out on these rookies that overperformed. Like Elijah Moore, I probably missed the boat on Elijah Moore, but I have not yet missed the boat on Bateman, I don't think, and neither have you probably. So go make that work.
Yeah, about 3/4 of Jackson's throws since Bateman has come into the league, made his debut against, back in week 6, they have gone to Hollywood, Andrews, and Bateman, like you mentioned. So that's a nice narrow route tree. My favorite stat so far is his first 11 career catches all went for first downs. So he's clearly a guy that the Ravens trust and that Lamar trusts. He's only going to get better. With Lamar making that leap as a passer so far this year, I really do believe that a Justin Jefferson-esque second half is on the table. He's not going to set the rookie receiving record or anything on his level, but I think in that sort of second half breakout range where he becomes a must-start receiver going forward, I think that's totally a valid scenario that could play out. Are you worried about when Sammy Watkins returns, Lamar spreading it out a bit more?
I've never been worried about Sammy Watkins to this day in my life. I will not start now. If Sammy comes back, I expect him to sneak away maybe a couple of targets here and there until he inevitably gets injured again, and then we don't have to worry about it.
So how about a guy that we talked about already, Adrian Peterson for Rashod Bateman?
I will take Bateman still.
Now, this trade does have a bigger name in it. Terry McLaurin and Tony Pollard for Bateman and Michael Carter.
I like both pieces on the Bateman side more. I certainly prefer Carter. I like him to have more usable weeks here going forward. So give me that duo.
Dan, I know you're high on McLaurin, so I'm curious on that same question for you. McLaurin and Pollard for Bateman and Michael Carter.
You're asking me?
Yes.
I will go with the Bateman and Michael Carter side. I do love McLaurin, but Pollard at this point is a pure insurance policy back. He's lost the ability to sort of start him as a flex, so I agree. I would go with Bateman and Carter.
And Dan, who's your sell high receiver?
I'm interested to hear Jake because I felt like this week in particular was a really difficult week to find a sell high wide receiver because every decent wide receiver stunk. So I was like, okay, let me look. So I'm just going to go with DeVonta Smith, and I don't really know if DeVonta Smith is a sell high wide receiver, but again, he had a good game here, obviously 6 targets, 5 catches, 116 yards. and a touchdown. That comes off the heels of a 3-target, 1-catch, 15-yard performance against the Lions. And really what it is that you are seeing the evolution of the Eagles offense here, where the first 7 weeks, Jalen Hurts averaged over 34 pass attempts per game, and the last 2 games, he's had 14 pass attempts and 17 pass attempts, and they have had a win and a close loss. So they finally figured out what everybody else knew, which is stop letting the offense run entirely through Jalen Hurts, run the ball more, and that will make Hurts more effective. So the good news is that the targets only go to 2 players, and that is DeVonta Smith and Dallas Goedert. So I think Smith will probably be usable, but I think this is most likely when his value is going to be at an apex, because as much as I love him as a receiver, they're going to have that few pass attempts, and I think that's what their goal is going to be. It's going to be really hard for him to provide very solid value each and every week.
So you're not worried about, sort of like what Jake was mentioning with missing out on these rookie receivers. This could be similar to Bateman, a guy who is now taking off, ready for a second half explosion. You're not worried about that?
First of all, I love Rashod Bateman, and Rashod Bateman is talked about on every single waiver wire show. Like, legit, people will not even pick him up for whatever reason. I think it's always possible. We saw last year with Justin Jefferson where he had like a quiet first couple of games and then was just bang, best receiver. It is possible, but I just think that the Eagles offense and what they want to do correctly, by the way, because their defense is not terrible. Jalen Hurts is not accurate enough to carry the load as a pass-happy team. I just think that DeVonta Smith could be the most talented wide receiver in the NFL, but you've seen it from Allen Robinson. If you don't get the targets, if you don't get the pass attempts, it's just not going to work. So, yeah, am I worried about it? I'm worried anytime I make a stat that they could be sort of wrong, but I feel pretty comfortable, for me, selling DeVonta Smith high.
One quick trade comparison here. DeVonta Smith and Javonte Williams for Julio Jones.
No, I'm not. Man, I can't believe my buy low of Julio Jones is like, let's go get him, guys. Let's go get him. And then every trade involved, like, well, you get Julio Jones. I'm like, what are you, nuts? Go the other way. No, but that's hilarious that went by. To me, I would like to ask Jake if that's okay. Jake, DeVonta Smith or Julio Jones rest of season, who would you prefer?
I would still prefer Julio Jones. Much as it pains me to say, his ickiness I can get over as long as we can see a stretch of consistency, which we know is capable with him. I don't know that that's capable for Smith this year.
So I may be just totally off then on my buy low of Julio Jones, because I imagine that the majority of fantasy managers would prefer Smith, even if not by a lot. But I just say if you put both of them right there, again, I hate trading one for one in the same tier, but you put both of them there, you get to choose one. I would assume most would rather have DeVonta Smith, so maybe I'm wrong there. I also would rather have Julio Jones like that. So that's the type of thing that I'm thinking with the buy low and the sell high.
Jake, were
Most
you
are
able
super smart like we are, by the way.
That's true. We are like legit geniuses right now, so it's unfair for us to compare.
Jake, were you able to find a good sell high receiver for the week?
I don't know if it's good, and I'm going to become the long-winded preface guy here, apparently. I'm not saying to just go trade this guy if you have him, just to trade him. But I am saying I'm nervous for Jamar Chase to hold up to the insane level of production that he's had at the start of the season. That I want to get that out of the way. So with T. Higgins in the lineup, so he missed a couple of weeks, missed weeks 3 and 4, but if you take those games away, they have basically been 50-50 in terms of target share. You know, it's been 59 targets for Chase. It's been 57 targets for Higgins. Higgins also had a couple of games coming out of that injury where it just seemed like he was not what he was last year. So this is less a knock against Chase, more so just a boost to T. Higgins, who maybe go try trading for him too. I think we could be on the verge of, this is a second Tyler Lockett reference, but we could have a Tyler Lockett-esque second half for Jamar Chase, where, of course, you're going to get those amazing game-winning weeks out of him. I still very much believe that. But you're looking at a guy whose yards per target to start the year was just off the charts. I think as of a couple of weeks ago, it was almost 15 yards per target. That's since crept down to a more reasonable level. And so if you take away just a little bit of that touchdown production, he's such a name right now. You can probably get the world for him. So if you're at a spot where you need depth because you're decimated by injury, that's the situation where you can make those 2-for-1s probably work in your favor.
Coming off his worst game production-wise, did have a team-high 13 targets in Week 9. Would you sell Chase for Tony Pollard and CeeDee Lamb?
No. No, I like CeeDee Lamb, but as Dan said, correctly, I believe, Tony Pollard is, just kind of an insurance policy here.
How about one big one? Jamar Chase and Nick Chubb for Dalvin Cook, David Montgomery, and Brandin Cooks. I'll repeat that. Jamar Chase and Nick Chubb for Brandin Cooks, Dalvin Cook, and David Montgomery.
Oh, this is tough because the appeal of having two starting quality running backs right now almost wins every trade. So, boy, Nick Chubb, I just talked about, he might see a little bit of work to Kareem Hunt here when he comes back. Not that he's going to fall off the face of the earth. I think I would go with the two running back side in this.
Let's move to the rest of season rankings. Let's start with you here, Jake. Who is your biggest riser in the running back rankings, and who is your biggest faller?
Riser is purely out of my own stupidity from earlier in the year, not believing Joe Mixon to be the truth. I thought Joe Mixon was a matchup-dependent RB2. It turns out against Cleveland this week, not a great matchup, but he still produced pretty well. So he has now moved into that must-start. I mean, not like I wasn't starting him before, but he is now a running back one regardless going forward.
And then your biggest faller is somebody that Dan is actually, I think, a little higher than you on.
Yeah, now I'm wondering here if I'm just the fretful Green Bay Packer fan who doesn't believe in Aaron Jones anymore, and that's why he is fallen down. Because I did see A.J. Dillon come in and start taking away not only a good chunk of the rushing production, but he's getting a little involved in the passing game now. Of course, he's never going to be Aaron Jones in that respect, but I think his ceiling going forward, even with Aaron Rodgers coming back, it's just not what it was going to be at the start of the year, and so that's why I move him down.
Lawyer Dan, would you care to make a rebuttal?
No, I think that's perfect, actually. I really do, because it's not incorrect, which I know is something that people make fun of me for saying, but it's not wrong to say that because, yeah, his ceiling is a bit more capped, and I have moved him down. If we go back to my draft rankings versus where I have him now, Jones is lower, but I think, like Jake, correctly, they're concerned about him, and there is reason to be concerned. I am just basically trying to think about it in the fact that, like, Dillon has looked good, and he has been more of a plus in the passing game than I ever would have expected based on his college experience, but he's still not really good when you dig into it. He's not a great pass blocker. And I think we're going to see here when things get back to a little bit normal, where everyone is healthy and everyone is back on the field, a little more status quo, where, again, Dillon had gone from averaging 13 touches a game, and then he was getting 4 or 5 touches a game. So I think we're going to be somewhere in between that. That means Jones is going to get more. So I'm still buying Jones.
Jake, the trade comparison here it's just the one, but it's a doozy. Aaron Jones and Saquon Barkley for Jonathan Taylor.
Wow. I love Jonathan Taylor. I'm a Packer fan. I'm also a Badger guy. So, I love all the pieces involved here. But you're looking at two of the most top tier running backs here for an amazing, maybe the running back one. So it is very tough. But if you can get 2 for 1 at running back of that quality, I have to do it.
Dan, which running backs are on the move in your rest of season rankings?
So I can give you a bunch of names if you want. Of course, we mentioned James Conner. He obviously rose a lot. But the single biggest riser in terms of the actual number that he was last week is Devonta Freeman, who was 65 coming into last week at running back. I did not really value him. He is now at 31 in my half PPR rankings. And I think the reason is just that in addition to the fact that Latavius Murray continues to not be healthy here, I think Devonta Freeman has just won that job, and he is going to be the primary back here going forward for the Ravens. So there's no Tyson Williams, 13 for 79 in the touchdown. He's a guy who I think you can now kind of start reliably as a flex going forward. So that's the guy who has moved the most in my rankings.
And you said you're not overly concerned about whenever Latavius Murray does return, because he was the guy who was getting those carries before he got hurt.
Yeah, first of all, I believe they're the Thursday game this week, right? So unless
I wouldn't. Murray hasn't practiced at all. Even
he's not going to play this week.
He's
not going to play this week, so we have one. But the bottom line is this: there is no loyalty to Latavius Murray. This is not like getting Wally pipped, to use a baseball term, right? This is not like, oh well, gosh, he's been our guy for 3 years, and now Devonta Freeman comes off the couch and he's been performing well. So we really have to be, we have to give our guy sort of back his role. He came off the couch as well. He was barely in there. He was okay. He was scoring touchdowns. I think there's no loyalty right now to Latavius Murray. So I'm good with Devonta Freeman.
I think Wally Pipp has sort of like persevered outside of baseball.
It's into just the regular vernacular now.
It's in the lexicon at this point. And who's your biggest faller?
My biggest faller is Tony Pollard, who, again, I mentioned before. I had been ranking him sort of as a guy. He was RB31 before. He's now RB39. A guy who I thought you could basically start as a flex for most weeks. Even though the snaps weren't there were at least enough sort of production and enough touches to make him viable. And we've now gone from double-digit touches in 5 straight games to 13 combined in the last 2. So you can't feel comfortable starting him. He's just an insurance policy back, so it doesn't make me want to roster him. I mean, I'd roster him. You should roster him, of course. But he's now just in the Alexander Madison sort of, conglomerate of backup backs.
Dan, Devonta Freeman for Adrian Peterson and Jeremy McNichols, both Titans backs.
Ooh, that's interesting. I think I'd probably just take Freeman at this point, just because I do think Freeman represents a guy who I think I can put in my starting lineup, especially this week. And AP and McNichols, while they may combine for more production, neither one of them do I feel comfortable I can start each and every week. So I think I'll take Freeman there.
Yeah, I just don't want the headache of having to decide which of Peterson or McNichols is, I think.
And don't forget Devonta Freeman, who might be the most valuable back there. So,
Jake, who's your biggest riser at wide receiver, and who is your biggest faller?
Biggest riser for me is the return of Bobby Woods this week. Really heartening to see him finish as a top 12 guy again in week 9. I had so many concerns because coming into the season, I loved Robert Woods. I thought him and Cooper Kupp were just going to be the cat's pajamas. Both turned out Matt Stafford ate brunch a lot more with Cooper Kupp or something, and so he got all the targets. But this last week, Robert Woods got more involved, and they're using him in the same creative ways that he was used last year, which is what was lacking so much, it seemed like, at the start of the season. We're seeing him get a little bit of rushing work, not as much as he had last year. But my confidence level in him is now like, okay, he can be a fringe wide receiver 2 guy now the rest of the way, while Cooper Kupp still maintains being the best thing in the league.
Yeah, who among us hasn't grown closer to somebody over brunch? Who is your biggest faller?
My biggest, first of all, I think I distance myself from people more at brunch. That's more of like a relationship changer for the negative. I don't think I am either. I need some lessons. My biggest wide receiver faller is Mike Williams. I had maybe the longest leash on Mike Williams in terms of, hey, he started off really hot and he had some down weeks. We got to give the guy a break. But this past week here, I don't know what the deal is. It is a tale of two worlds with Mike Williams right now. And you're either getting 100-plus yards, top 10 finish, or you're getting almost nothing. So let's do the hat trick. He's Tyler Lockett now, and that makes him a less sturdy option.
So, ironically, and I've been waiting for this all show, one of the trade comparisons is Mike Williams for Tyler Lockett. So who would you rather have?
This is terrifying. I have to talk about Tyler. I'm in a prison of my own design right now. I think I would take Mike Williams still, just on the hope that Justin Herbert gets his stuff back together. Because that's, I think, the difference, of course, is Justin Herbert, we know he's going to be quality. I don't know. I hate it both ways, if I'm being honest, though.
Let me give you one with Robert Woods. Woods and Zach Ertz for Mike Gesicki and Jerry Jeudy.
I love Mike Gesicki right now. And that's something I didn't picture myself saying at the start of the year. So I like Jerry Jeudy more as a consistent guy. He probably has the safest floor, certainly out of that Broncos trio. So give me Jeudy.
Dan, who is your biggest riser and biggest faller at Fantasy's deepest position?
They actually switched spots, which is great. My biggest riser is Marquise Brown, who goes from wide receiver 21 to wide receiver 14, and my faller is DJ Moore, who goes from 14 to 21. Not intentional. We mentioned it with Bateman, with Hollywood Brown. It's just a more pass-happy offense, as we talked about it. Brown has seen basically 26% of the targets he produces. He scored at least a touchdown in 5 of his 8 games. He's seen fewer than 6 targets once the whole season. He just produces each and every week. He's a borderline wide receiver 1 at this point for me. And for my faller, it's DJ Moore. And again, this is just something where the great target share is not enough to overcome the crappiness of the actual targets that he is getting. Both Sam Darnold and PJ Walker do not inspire me with confidence. A max of 73 yards receiving in any game over his last 5. You still start him. He's like a wide receiver too, but I feel, worse about it than I used to.
I'm curious why now is the right time to move up Hollywood. He had 9 catches for 116 yards in week 9. But what happened this week that didn't happen in the first 2 months of the season? Because he's been a top 10 fantasy receiver basically all year long. In his last 16 games dating back to last season, 12 touchdowns, 1,200 yards. He only has 2 bad games all year. One of them, he had multiple dropped long touchdowns, which is fluky for him. So it could have been a big day. And the other was when they were up by like 4 touchdowns over the Chargers all day long. So the game script wasn't in his favor. So I'm curious what you saw now that is finally giving you the confidence that you were lacking earlier.
I think the short answer is that I move at glacial speed. I move very slowly off of my draft rankings. He has moved up pretty much universally every single week that we have had. It's just been by a couple of spots. But now, I'm now fully convinced that we are not going back to the old Ravens way here where they're throwing 25 pass attempts per game. I think the pass attempts are going to be up. It is very clear where they're going, Hollywood Brown. And I think basically it took me this long to admit I was wrong. I like to admit I'm wrong once every 3 years. This is the time that I will do it for now. It took a few weeks.
One trade comparison here, ironically also involving our favorite player of today's show, Hollywood for Tyler Lockett and Antonio Gibson.
No, I can't do that. I don't want Gibson, but I need to at least see whether or not he looks a little better after having the bye week and maybe his shin has improved. And, man, I don't want Tyler Lockett either, but with Russell back, that's too much for me, so I wouldn't do that trade.
Let's very quickly do some rapid-fire mailbag questions here before we wrap the show. Dan, I'll start with you. Was drafting Travis Kelce in the first round worth the pick? That's from @_Robert Chavez.
Probably not, just given how he has not quite separated himself from the rest of the pack. But I don't think that's a disaster. I don't think you have lost your league because you took a guy who is still very clearly the number 1 tight end in fantasy at the end of the first round. So yes, a mistake, but not a killer mistake.
Sticking with the Chiefs, Jake @MLeonard8 asks, what kind of return would you look for with Patrick Mahomes?
With Patrick Mahomes, I am personally not looking to trade him away right now because I think his value is so depressed. But if you really want to, I think a reasonable return would be somebody, I guess positionally aside, because I also hate doing the 1-for-1 at the same position. But if you can get a running back that is going to be a consistent near running back 1, that's absolutely a smash. I don't know if you can still get that. But yeah, I'm looking at a consistent running back start.
Jake, I'll give you this one as well. @JoshDoesIt73 asks, do you sit players on purpose to guarantee victory and fear stat corrections when it's close? And the example he used in a screenshot is he had the Steelers defense going into last night. He was up by about 1 point. That's obviously, it could go negatives, I assume it with his scoring format. So is that a scenario where you would sit them on purpose just to guarantee the victory, or do you play your full starting lineup regardless?
Yeah, I'm a do-gooder, so I'll play my entire lineup regardless there and just hope that I can not have them ruin it for me. And especially if it's that close, because like you said, stat corrections are very real and can very quickly make you look like a dummy for doing something like that.
Dan, what about you in that philosophical question?
Yeah, I always play my players, and I let the fantasy gods decide what they may, but I will never intentionally bench anyone to protect against a stat correction.
Jake, as Dan knows, I do like to ask a pop culture question here at the end of the episode. So before we wrap up another blast of an episode, let's take a moment for a blast from the past. And Jake, I will start with you here because I want to give Dan a chance to come up with his answer so he doesn't yell at me like he did last week. Give me your favorite cartoon of all time. And to be clear, this does not have to be a show for children. You could pick a more modern, adult animated show if you'd like, or you could pick a kid's show, whatever you prefer. Jake, you're on the hot seat. Favorite cartoon, go.
That's an almost impossible decision that I have to make, but I'm going with recency here. So the last thing that I watched, it's now, I think, 5 seasons in. It's on Netflix. It's called Big Mouth. This is very much not for children. Please don't let your children watch this. But this is Nick Kroll, John Mulaney and company, just going through the growing pains of childhood and some of the trauma that comes with that, and it's fantastic.
Yes, thank you for the caveat. Please, anybody listening, do not show that show to your children. Dan, you've now had a few moments to think about it. What do you have for me?
I did have an initial instinct. I will stick with that instinct, and I will go back to my childhood, which is probably way earlier than either of your childhoods. I'm going with Thundercats, and part of the reason is because one of the joys I take in fatherhood is not just spending quality time with my children and family, but it is being able to show them, the kids, all the things that I grew up on and just seeing what their reaction is. And they became totally obsessed with Thundercats. And in watching it back, you realize how terrible that show was and how I can't believe that it resonates with anyone. And yet I sat there and I watched the entire series over and over again, even as an adult. So to me, Sword of Thundera, give me sight beyond sight. I will watch that one. That's my favorite cartoon.
Yeah. To be clear, I'm not going to pick up on any references to the show because I have not seen it. If I'm picking the show that like gave me the most joy at the time, it's probably Rugrats, because as a kid that was just like my favorite show ever. But nowadays, if I'm looking at what would truly be my favorite, I think BoJack Horseman is one of the most brilliant shows ever created. So that would be probably my pick. Although even though I came up with this question, I didn't actually spend much time thinking about what my answer would be. And again, to be clear, Rugrats very much for kids, BoJack Horseman very much not. But thank you guys for bearing with me on that. And also thank you both for a fantastic episode today. I'm certainly hoping that you had as much fun as I did, and also that we all come away just a little bit smarter. Please, everybody, remember all the awesome opportunities we mentioned today, including Prize Picks with the promo code GRIDIRON, Manscaped with the promo code GATES, and Air Medcare Network with offer code FantasyPros. Most of all, thank you, the fans, for listening. For Dan and Jake, I'm Ryan Wormley. We'll see you again soon.
Thanks for tuning in to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. Don't forget to check out our featured videos. And while you're at it, make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Fantasy Pros, so you can get the latest news and updates to give you the edge you need in your fantasy league.